Peace to episode 2. In this episode, I talk with my fellow co-host Andy Chambers about his personal history in the anti-fascist and anti-racist movement and what he thinks the future strategy of such organisations should be. I apologise for the slightly subpar quality of the audio, as I didn't have my usual equipment and had to rely on my mobile phone. But aside from that, I hope you enjoy listening to another episode of A Few of the Many. Hello, and welcome to one of our many secret podcast bunkers that we host around an undisclosed location. I'm Mike Holmes, and this is going to be a kind of spin-off to the main A Few of the Many show. I've not decided what we're going to call it yet, but
I think we should call it One of the Many.
One of the Many, yeah. A Few of the Many versus the Fourth Reich.
Yes, I like it.
Speaking of Andy, that gentleman you hear speaking is Andy Chambers, one of our fellow co-hosts on A Few of the Many, and I believe it's your first time on the show.
It is, yeah. Other commitments have just been gone. Since I agreed to do this podcast, I thought it was a brilliant idea. I've been just so swamped, but all that's gone now, and I'm free to dedicate some time to this.
So what we're talking about today is Andy brilliantly organised a coach from Mansfield to London on the 17th of November for the National Unity Day against racism and fascism. Was that its official name?
National Unity Demonstration, I think it was called.
So, question one, Andy, what did you think of the day of demonstration?
I thought it was great. I thought it was really good. The weather was lovely for a start. That always makes a demo better. There's no worse feeling than getting off a coach in London, knowing you're not going to be back on the coach for 5 hours and just chucking it down with rain. It's miserable. So that made it better to start with. But it was really a positive thing to see so many different organisations there, so many people there for a start. Conservative estimates are about 50,000 people.
Really?
And that's a good turnout. That is getting bigger and bigger year on year, so I was pleased.
Excellent. What do you think that marches like this achieve, generally speaking?
Well, I think they do three things, really. The first and most important, I think, is showing solidarity with those communities who suffer through racism and discrimination and stuff, and who, like, it's no secret that race hate attacks have gone up since Brexit vote. You know what I mean? By a considerable margin, 20% in some regions. And so it's important to get on the streets to show solidarity with communities like that are affected the most, and say, we're not letting it happen this time. We're going to make a stand against the rise of the far right, you know what I mean? So that's the most important, I think, to show solidarity with communities that are affected. And the second really important reason is to show the likes of Tommy Robinson and all those other far right fascists that they will not march on the streets unopposed, that we're not going to lie down quietly, that we remember the consequences of sitting back and doing nothing while fascism is on the rise. That it's clearly written in the history books, and not this time. So that's the second most important reason. The third, I think, is it shows people from, like, a small town like Mansfield, that there's a nation of people who feel the same way, who went to great efforts to get to London on that day to stand shoulder to shoulder with each other, and that sense of solidarity and companionship and unity makes it all worthwhile.
Absolutely. I think it's good to show that, they can't just say, oh, it's the, metropolitan middle-class liberal elite.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Because when you're on the demonstration itself, and I was there with you, as you know, marching, it was really interesting seeing the diversity of what people were marching about under this umbrella. And that included your Palestinian Solidarity campaign, individual deportation cases. But what really stuck out to me, and I thought, yes, good on you, were the Liverpool lads with their red banner.
Yeah, they looked impressive with the flares, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They and I think that's because they were saying they're marching against fascism of all kinds, and I do think that sometimes we do forget that it comes in many guises now in terms of the far right, and they had against ISIS.
Yeah, and I think those lads, seeing those there, because when they first turned up, they were all dressed in Burberry caps and stuff, and all looking shifty. And I could see they had this big banner, and I went to take a photo of them, see what they were doing, and they wrapped it up and walked further down away from me. So I thought, aye, aye. So I'll keep an eye on them. And it was brilliant to see that they were on our side.
Yeah.
And I think that's what football needs now more than anything, because they were all young, and they were all passionate football fans, and they take that banner to games, and so they can help to counteract the racist message of organisations like the Democratic Football Lads Alliance or whatever the crap they called it from day to day to day. You know what I mean? And so young football fans, motivated by nothing apart from the fact that they don't like fascism, it was brilliant to see.
It was.
Brilliant.
It really was.
And another great thing about those lads is they were all working class like me.
Absolutely.
You know? And it really pains me when working class align with fascist views, because they're like turkeys voting for Christmas. They're fighting exactly against what is good for them.
I suppose it's also like you're saying, historically under fascism, working class activists have been some of the first people to be targeted after the regime takes power.
Yeah. And because when fascists get into power, they come for the working classes and socialists and anybody that gives a damn.
Yeah.
You know? And it should be really elitists at the top of society who are fascists.
Yeah.
And exclusively them. Because fascism looks after the exclusive top of society. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, historically, and even with Donald Trump, his main base, everyone goes on about the white working class supporters in America.
Yeah.
People like that. But actually, overwhelmingly, it was the upper and the middle rich white Americans who were his solid base.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because he was looking after their class and economic interests. So
it pains me that the working classes in this country have been, and it's partly Labour's fault. You know, they've been ignored and pushed to the edges of society for too long. You know, so a financial crisis hits. They already feel desperate and angry. Fascism on the rise, you know, but they should be looking up at the course instead of looking down.
Absolutely. And that's where political education needs to come in. And this is where I think Labour and the trade union movement, as the biggest, well, the trade union movement particularly, perhaps needs to be taking more of a lead in educating its activists on how to fight fascism, but fight fascism's ideological undercurrents and how, the reactionary stuff, because I find that too many people, and me and B talked about this in the other episode, when you go on social media, it seems to be a very sort of middle-class area, sector, where it's too easy to say, oh, you're a thick racist, and shut up, and I'm not saying, like, what about the poor racist? I'm not saying that, but what I'm saying is, how do you bring these people on the verge back? Because you look at, Ricky Tomlinson. I remarked on how, I thought it was quite remarkable when he talked about how initially he was drawn to the far right, and yet his working class colleagues gave him the ragged trousered philanthropist to read, which brought him to the left, and he ended up being quite far on the left, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. So Ricky Tomlinson had his views were far right.
Yeah, he had an initial brush with them. I don't know to what extent, but he was brought back.
Yeah.
And he became a very solid comrade.
I completely agree. Completely agree that people on the fringes of that society, of that movement, the far right, you can get through to them and say, look, you're one of us. We've got more in common. Me and you and the immigrant you're fighting against have got more in common than the people at the top.
Yeah, on a class basis.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And while we're fighting each other, they're laughing at us from the top.
Yeah.
Because it's the typical divide and conquer. That's why the media have been drip feeding a far right racist message for decades, because they want this division in society. When you look at the big picture, it's simple to see.
Yeah, it is. And as we've seen historically, and once again, you were absolutely on point when it talks about They're bringing on like Steve Bannon onto the BBC shows and like Oxford Union debates. Say we need to have both sides of the debate, and really what they're doing is enabling very extreme views because Steve Bannon is a white nationalist.
Yeah, it's horrific. It's horrific. Now I've been an anti-fascist since I was at school, and I think now more than any time, now it's an exciting time in politics, but it's a dangerous time in politics, and the left have got to make sure we win this battle. On our coach to Mansfield, as you know, we got up and shared our stories.
Yes.
Right? And there was a survivor of the Rwandan genocide who told his story. It moved me to tears. I was behind him at the front of the coach. His story is a simple example of what unfettered hatred can unleash. In 3 months, over 800,000 people were massacred in just 3 months. But his story was also a story of hope, because he told the coach that even though he was a devout Christian, it was a Muslim family who took him in and hid him and fed him at great danger and risk to themselves until it was safe for him to leave the country. But the story of the Rwandan genocide is exactly what can happen if this sort of message of hatred isn't opposed, and that's why the march was important.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about the history of fascism, the history of movement. What about your own personal history? You have touched on you being an anti-racist since you were a child, being an activist. How did you come to be involved in that?
Well, I think that fight against fascism and racism has informed my politics from when I was a 13-year-old whippersnapper to now. And it started one day at school. I went to a pretty rough. It weren't like a massively rough inner city school, but bullying was rife and fighting was rife, and it weren't anything unusual. And at school, I was not a fighter. I was 6 stone wet through and a nerdy geek. But one playground, dinner time, walked round a corner and saw 2 big 5th years kicking this first year to crap. And I just did what any sensible lad would have done, turned round and walked away. And just as I was going back round the corner, I heard one of them saying something along the lines of, "Take that, you little chinky bastard." And I stopped dead in my tracks. And I'm telling you now, mate, I wanted to walk around the corner and get away. But just something inside burned that I just couldn't let it happen, you know? I mean, getting battered at school was a regular thing, but for something you had no control over, like the colour of your skin, it made no sense to me at all. So I turned round and I said, "Pick on somebody your own size." And naturally, they did, and battered the fuck out of me. And but I managed to get one good kick in, so I was pleased with that. But even, they broke my glasses, they broke my nose, all sorts of things. But even as I was on the floor in a pile of my own snot, I saw that little lad run away, and I thought, he knows at least one of us gives a damn, you know? And I think socialism, on a wider front, is defending the vulnerable against those that would attack them, and making sure you leave nobody behind, and society looks after each other. So the fight against fascism and racism is integral to me with socialism and the fight against austerity and the fight for social justice.
So, 13-year-old, you made a decision, which has continued to shape you for the rest of your life.
Yeah. I rapidly learned to fight and went out with Anti-Nazi League and later Anti-Fascist Action and put myself in the way of National Front marches and BNP marches and later the EDL and later the DLA. Do you know what I mean?
What was the situation like in the 1980s and 1990s from your personal perspective? Because I know the National Front was very big in the late 70s, coming up to the election of Margaret Thatcher. But after that, what's the story, so to speak?
I was watching something on YouTube the other day, and the National Front marched 80,000 people through Leicester. You know what I mean? In 1977 or something like that. And it's pretty horrific to imagine that today, even with 8,000 or 9,000 people marching for the DLA. But in the 80s and 90s, the situation was a hell of a lot more violent than it is now. Mainly because the police get in the way of the opposing camps, you know? And it takes a big city of lefties like Liverpool, for instance, The last dozen times that any organisation in the far right has tried to march through Liverpool has come together and stopped them. From the humiliating locking up the white man march in the train station, they had to lock them up in a lost luggage centre for their own safety, to last year when the EDL was stopped, to this year a couple of them have tried again, and every time the city unites and comes out in force, and I wish it was like that everywhere, so kudos to Liverpool for that. But ordinarily what happens nowadays is you turn up with some, well, it all depends. There are lots of organisations that fight fascism in different ways, but my kind of fight against fascism, I was at I won't exactly call it violent, because violence still petrifies me, but we were prepared to put ourselves in the way of marchers and come what may. And our intention was to stop the march. Because it's no secret, when a march of fascists goes through a town, for the next couple of 3 weeks, it emboldens the local fascists to get stroppy on a bus or in a shop, and racist attacks go up, even if it's just verbal abuse, you know what I mean? So anti-fascist action tries to stop that, tries to stop them in their tracks, and a few times it succeeds. But most of the time, you get battered out of the way by coppers these days, and you don't get a chance to get in front of the fascists. You just get pushed out of the way. But back in the 80s and 90s, it was a lot more free-flowing and a lot more violent. I can remember having my head kicked in a few times, but also at the same time being the one doing the kicking. And I'm not going to say too much about that.
No, perhaps best not.
Self-incriminating and all that. But yeah, it was a lot more violent back in the day. And sometimes when I'm fired up, I'm thinking, I wish these coppers would get out of the way. But most of the time, I'm thinking I'm glad they're there, really.
Yeah. Do you reckon the situation has got worse since the economic crash in 2008? And what about since the Brexit referendum?
I think definitely since the crash. I think it was coming. But I think electing a fascist in the White House, because I'm not going to mince words, there's no other description of him. Dennis Skinner calls him a fascist, and I agree with him 100%. But that coinciding with the Brexit vote, I was at Glastonbury when the Brexit vote came in, and I came back to my little hometown on the Tuesday or Wednesday after, out shopping, and I saw a woman walking by in a pink hoodie in broad daylight with North Notts EDL written on it, right? And I'd only ever seen one of them at a rally. EDL members take them to the rally in plastic carrier bags because they didn't want to be seen on a train with them on. I'd never seen it. So I asked her, I said, what are you wearing that for? I thought there was an EDL rally in the town and I'd missed it. And she said, well, Brexit means they've all got to fuck off now. And I said, what do you mean? I said, it wasn't a vote to get rid of immigrants. She said, yeah, but that's what it'll mean. And I said, I thought the EDL weren't supposed to be racist. I thought you were just supposed to be against extreme Islam. Everybody's against extremism, you know? I am. But she said, I don't care what the EDL are. I'm fucking racist and they can all piss off. And that genuinely scared me, because a couple of months later, the EDL were coming to Nottingham. And I thought, they'd been withering into nothing for a few years. But I thought, having seen her in my little hometown, I was really scared that the EDL would mobilise back to the numbers they had when they first started, like 8,000 to 9,000 at a rally. But it didn't come to pass. There was only like 120 of them. But yeah, I think the Brexit vote has emboldened racists to risk sticking their head above the parapet. And it's about time we made them ashamed and scared again. And if not us, who?
You're quite active in the North Notts Momentum and generally in Labour Party politics, just like myself.
Yeah.
What do you think the specific role that these organisations can play in politically educating people, activists, to sort of delegitimise fascism through just tearing the arguments apart, attacking them at the strongest points, completely demolishing their credibility in a way that doesn't alienate and polarise people more, but actually sort of helps bring them into a environment of political education which makes them see that socialism is more in their economic and class interests?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a great question.
Not an easy question to answer.
It's not an easy question to answer, and especially to somebody like me, whose first three reactions to fascism are
crush, kill, destroy.
Yes. There was a big pause there because I couldn't say anything without swearing. So my first three reactions to that sort of thing are no debate. I've got zero tolerance for you. I think every Labour Party member and every trade union member, from whether you joined last week or you've been a lifelong member, I think it's incumbent upon you now to do whatever you can to talk to your friends and colleagues and people in the pub and strangers on the bus and the train, wherever, to get across the message that these are dangerous times we're living in, and that if we're not vigilant. I was speaking to an old Jewish guy at the rally, and he said his parents, they got out of Germany, I think 2 or 3 days before Kristallnacht, and came to Britain as refugees. Only just survived, but he can remember them telling stories about how they used to laugh at Hitler and his party and think nobody's ever going to take them seriously, when he's utterly ridiculous. I think that's what the left have been doing for a long time, and thinking that nobody will give Tommy Robinson and his arguments credence because we can all see it's blatantly racist and fascist, and that's not the British way. But that's not paying attention to history and paying attention to circumstances. So I think it's incumbent upon every member from the grassroots up to spread that message that these are dangerous times and we've got to be vigilant and we've got to say no to fascism. But also the organisations themselves could do more. I was really impressed to find out after the rally when we come back, Unite issued a 3-line whip to all their organisers, all their paid organisers had to be at the rally, which I think is brilliant. I mean, and I'm very grateful to Unite because they helped pay for our bus, But they need to do more. They need to, and they, as well as helping to pay for our bus, from our area, they took a bus full of organisers, which again is brilliant. But they need to mobilise their members. How they do that, I've got no idea. It's a difficult question to answer. But political education forums and getting their shop stewards to talk about racism at work, it can be led from the top, But the whole of the left needs to be on high alert about this for the next year or two, at least, I would think. Get the message across that, because I look at the things that fascists are angry at, and I'm angry at them too. I'm angry that my nephew's education isn't as good as it could be, and that there are people in my family suffering from mental health crises who have been waiting 18 months for basic therapy, and that it's difficult to get a doctor's appointment. But all those problems aren't caused by immigrants. All those problems are caused by Tory ideological cuts.
Which, as the UN has just said in its recent report, was a political choice, not an economic necessity.
That's United Nations. I don't know how any Tory MP could read that and not immediately resign and be ashamed, because that's United Nations who have criticised Britain once in the last 50 years, despite all the horrible, terrible things we've done. They've said that austerity was a political choice, and that's what I've been saying for 10 years. So if we can get that message across to people who are considering the message of the far right and say, because it's very simple to be a far right leader in this country, all you need to do is say, I understand your problems, it's all their fault, let's organise against them. But it's not immigrants' fault, it's the people at the top. And all fascists do really is say, I've got my little tiny piece of pie and I'm not going to share it with anybody, especially anybody who's not my skin colour. What I say is, I've got a tiny little piece of pie. I need to get together with my comrades and organise and say, no, we need more pie. Yeah. We need a fairer distribution of the pie,
Because the pie is big enough for all.
It is big enough for all. It's ridiculously big. No magic money tree, all of a sudden £1.5 billion for Ireland. So there is enough money out there. And the scarcity of resources is not down to 13% of the population. It's down to 1% of the population. And there's 99% of us that can fight them. So let's all get together and fight the top.
Brilliant. Any last words for people out there?
I think I just summed it up well. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you very much, Andy. And
cheers, Mike. It's been a gas. I've loved it.
I think it's just been brilliant. So I'm looking forward to having you back on the show proper.
Wicked.